I'm Alexis Schwerha with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. Today I am joined by a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Peter Berkowitz, to talk about a course he is teaching this semester called Varieties of Conservatism in America at Stanford University. This definitely caught our attention here at Campus Reform, and we are so excited to dive more into what his class will be teaching. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you very much.
I want to dive right into this topic because, like I said, this class definitely caught our attention because it's not often you see a college classroom that has the name conservative in the topic. So I'm very curious to ask, what makes your course unique from the other political science classes that are taught at Stanford?
Well, first, as you suggest, the content of the class. It's not only unusual at Stanford University, but it's unusual at universities around the country to have a class that focuses on the conservative dimensions of the American political tradition. And in fact, I've actually been writing about this subject for probably at least 15 years, that it's a kind of imperative, it seems to me, of a proper liberal education to include this aspect of the American political tradition. So I should also say all credit to Stanford University, the Civics Initiative that was launched by Professor Josiah Ober, and by the director of the Hoover Institution, Condoleezza Rice, who agreed that Hoover Institution could help fill this gap at Stanford University.
And when we were looking at the course description, it says that in the course, students will study Marx's classic critique of liberal democracy because the understanding of conservatism also requires an appreciation for the leading alternative. Can you kind of break this down for our viewers and explain what exactly the students will be learning?
Well, in the first place, I hope they take away what they should take away from any course of liberal education at the university. First, we try to transmit some information. What are the great ideas within this particular tradition? What in the United States are we trying to, various schools of conservatism, what are they trying to conserve? What are the tensions within the conservative tradition? What are the strengths and weaknesses? So we want information to be transmitted, but also we want to encourage students to think for themselves, to give them the equipment, not just the information, but the habits of mind that enable them to think for themselves.
And there is one part of the course description I would love for you to expand on. When reading the description, we saw that the introduction includes a study of Marx's classic critiques of liberal democracy because the understanding of conservatism also requires an appreciation of the leading alternative. Can you break down how you teach this to our audience?
Sure. The course, I suppose, begins in what might appear to be an unusual way. If you were organizing a course on American conservatism, you might begin, as many books have, in the post-World War II era, when a movement arises, a self-consciously conservative movement arises. Of course, there are conservative impulses and tendencies within the American tradition before the post-World War II era, but there's not a movement that thinks of itself as conservative. Why don't we start there? Because it seemed to me very important in understanding first, that there are varieties of conservatism and what distinguishes them. You have to understand what conservatives, any particular group of conservatives, are conserving. In the main, in the United States, it's conserving the American tradition, even as there are disputes about what is at the core of that tradition. It seems to me that one indispensable part of the American political tradition is the modern tradition of freedom. Seminal statement is John Locke. It is, in a way, restated in the American Declaration of Independence, where the Declaration of Independence declares that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that it's the job of government to secure these rights. This is a Lockean vision. It's not the only element of the American political tradition, but an important part. So I thought it was important that students also understand the Lockean heritage. We speak about other heritages, the biblical heritage, the civic republican heritage, but we emphasize the Lockean heritage. Also, it's very important, if we're going to emphasize the Lockean heritage, it's important that students appreciate the most influential and one of the most incisive critiques of that heritage. That's the Marxist critique. So we equip the students to understand the theoretical foundations, or some of the theoretical foundations, of the American constitutional tradition. And we also let them know, here's the great critique on the left of that tradition. Now, with this intellectual framework in place, let's understand what American conservatives sought to conserve, and let's understand the debates among conservatives about what's most in need of conserving and how we go about conserving it.
Like I said, this course is very unique, and I had read that it's one of the first of its kind. So I'm curious to know, how are students responding to this course at Stanford?
Well, I can only speak of the students enrolled in the seminar. As you know, I live in Washington, and so I'm only on campus a few days per week. But I've been very pleased by the students in the seminar. Students bring a variety of perspectives, and near as I can tell, all the students enrolled in this class are keen to learn, keen to engage, keen to wrestle with ideas. I've been quite impressed.
That is awesome to hear. And my final question for you to wrap this all up: why do you believe it's important to offer a class on conservatism?
Well, as I've already indicated, I think it's very important for colleges to provide undergraduates a liberal education. Liberal education seems to me begins at home, teaching students about their specific inheritance. That inheritance in the United States involves the American constitutional tradition and America's founding principles. And the American conservative tradition offers great insight on the American constitutional tradition. So from my point of view, studying conservatism, and I should say also studying progressivism, but that's taught at the universities generally. Studying conservatism is, in America, is an essential part of a liberal education.
That is definitely an interesting course to keep an eye on and look more out for. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.